still for me's the messenger. Let her go, don't question her. I met a Christian saint, the devil in Helsinki. I met a Christian saint. What does that mean?
Tricky is the stage and working name of a rapper and record producer from Bristol in England. He had a troubled youth, was passed around from home to home. In his later youth, he was in a gang. He had a spell in prison. In the mid-80s, he joined a sound system called the Wild Bunch, which I've not heard of, and I'm guessing is the chances are you haven't either, which in 1987 evolved into Massive Attack, which I definitely have heard of, and you, I'm guessing, almost certainly have heard of. Whilst he was part of Massive Attack in 1991, he met a girl called Martina Topley-Bird and found out that she could sing. She was 15 at that point. And they started making music together with her singing, and at some point after a while pressed a very independent record, which ended up getting him a contract. So it sounds like that was quick, but the contract was in 1995, so that's about 4 years later. And also, they had developed a romantic relationship by that time because it was around that sort of time that their baby was born. He then proceeded to have a successful solo career, which is still going 16 albums later. Hi, my name's Dan. So I make this as being Tricky's third album, despite the fact that several people have said it's the second album. But I think it's there is a second album which I would count that some people haven't counted because it was released under a different name. Yeah, I think it's his third album. I think this is probably my first listen to Tricky in any sense. I may have heard tracks by him before, and I do know of him. I recognise him visually more than I do vocally because I actually probably know him best from the film The Fifth Element, in which he plays a henchman. And I really have loved this film in the past, still love it, and I've seen it several times. And I used to live with a house share guy who every time he would come up would say, "That's Tricky, that is." So I knew who he was from that. So I want to describe this, I guess. There's quite a bit to say here. It's definitely hip-hop, but not hip-hop as you probably come across it before. I'd say it's kind of experimental, or maybe even just use the word broken hip-hop. You'll see what I mean as I go in. However, I understand that Tricky had said at one point that he wanted to make a punk record. He really isn't punk. I don't know what he meant by punk, if he meant something different. It's not that at all. So I think there's a mixture here of samples and real instruments being used. I don't know. There's not a lot of information about it on Wikipedia. I did do a bit more digging and found that there is definitely some live instruments going on here, but I don't know how much there is. And I would say that the kind of defining feature is that there's always, I'll put in brackets here in my notes, maybe always, but I think it's always something that's broken going on here. So either something's very distorted, or it's very muffled, or it's out of tune, or it's out of time, or it's stuttery, or it's backwards. I'm pretty much sure everywhere there's something where it's kind of something is designed to subvert the expectations of the music. There were times, the first time I listened to it, I'll come back to that, where I found some of that quite grating and difficult. Usually it's very repetitive, so it feels like a continuum. I wouldn't say repetitive in a bad way. I would say it kind of lulls you, as repetitive stuff does tend to do. So the slight sidebar, a lot of electronica, particularly in the kind of trance, dancey, but also ambient area of things, follow this idea from, which I understand has come through from minimalism and minimalist classical music, that you have stuff that's going on and then you change things, but you change things slowly. And it's certainly true that when you listen to things like that, that you've got a drum beat and it's going on, and after a while you just kind of stop really focusing on the drum beat, and something else changes and you focus on that, and it's the changes that you focus on rather than the continuum. And here, so it mostly has that kind of feeling of continuum. Sometimes there's ornamentation like guitar lines, something that isn't repeated all the time, and of course, mostly there's at most points there's lyrics as well, which are kind of the focal point. Um, but I'm still talking about the backing. So the overall effect of this is dysfunctional, and that is, I felt like this was a really strong word to use for this. I think dysfunctional is exactly what it is. It's kind of or broken, and I mean it's definitely deliberate that it's like this. If this was a deliberate way to express something about his life, and I know that his certainly his youth had all sorts of issues and problems in it, then that I could see artistically is very effective. Um, Whether that's intentional or not, I don't know. Um, there's there is some singing on here, female voice, which I presume is Martina Topley Bird, who I know was associated with him through some of his solo albums. Actually, no, I did look this up, so I do know it's her. Also, there's some female rapping, which I'm pretty sure is her as well. There is one track which has quite a long rant in a strong Jamaican accent. This might be somebody called Sky. I'm not 100% sure about that. And then in other places, Tricky himself raps. You'd kind of expect that to happen. He has a curious style. He kind of croaks, almost a whisper, and it's got this sound like he's got a real phlegm in his throat, and he's coming out like this. And I can't do it quite the way he does it. It's quite effective, but it's very much the opposite of shouty rap. It's kind of almost whispered rap, and slower than a lot of rap is. So it feels more like natural speaking. And I think that um, I I like the effect that this has. Firstly, in that I feel like he hasn't felt the pressure to go the same way as a lot of rappers have and go for kind of fast speed stuff and the rhythm of that. He's got a much kind of slower delivery. There's a strong South England accent going on here, and I think one of the kind of types of words that really typifies this is maybe the word, I don't know if it's in there anywhere, but maybe the word pull would be described as pull. And so you drop those L's at the end completely. There's lots of other kind of aspects of it as well. So it very much sounds British. So both him and Martin Topley Bird, but obviously the Jamaican accent guy doesn't sound like that. The words are mostly from him short sets of lines with different bits being repeated different times. So it's like he'll have lines 1, 2, 3, 4, and then do 3, 4, 3, 4, 3, 4, 5, 2, 3, 4, and that sort of thing. And it just, and eventually you get the whole thing. So he doesn't actually necessarily have a lot of lines for a track, maybe kind of 10 to 12. And I don't know what you feel about that from the way that I've described it, but actually I found it to be fairly effective. It was kind of wandering around this idea of a structured piece of writing. So that was all right. So I listened twice. The first time I absolutely hated it. Well, not very, very hated it, but wasn't impressed. Didn't like it, and particularly the kind of out of tune bits. So I do have a problem often with stuff that's out of tune. The second time, I felt like I'd I want to use the phrase I'd got my ears in. So I felt like I'd got used to it maybe after the first time, and I got quite a lot more out of it in the second listen. I know that I'm not a hip hop person, and this is definitely kind of fairly unusual even for hip hop. But I even felt like I kind of understood the out of tune stuff as well. Like, so once I'd kind of accepted that the whole point was to be dysfunctional, and that's certainly my theory, then I kind of saw it as part of that, doing that. So, yeah, the overall effect, I think, is that it's bleak, it's depressing, it's subversive, it's menacing. At times, it's hard listening. I would say that I relate to this better than I do to US gangster rap. And this may be about just different, the kind of closeness of backgrounds. So I don't necessarily understand or relate to stuff that's American gangster rap and ghetto stuff. I'm a bit closer to this, so it's not my kind of background, but I think I understand this background a little bit better. Did I enjoy it? Well, I think there were times in the second time through when I was enjoying it, but on the whole, really not that much, I think so. But I do think that I got it and that I kind of understood where it was. And I think I get that there would be some people who really love this, and that's not trying to say any kind of thing of, oh, if you love this, and I don't, then trying to be superior. I think it's just difference in tastes. And I think that there are, for some people, this might actually be a really significant kind of style. I don't know if his other albums are like this, so if it was just as a one-off, then definitely a significant album, because I think it does express some stuff. And I understand this idea that because it's true of me as well. You gravitate and you feel a connection with music that expresses something that you want to express yourself and maybe find it hard to express. My favourite track on this was a track called Lyrics of Fury, which has got kind of like a fast, funky drummer sound going on with Martina rapping, and it's a good groove. And yeah, so for that, I particularly liked it. So overall, yeah, mixed feelings, but there's some interesting stuff going on here. And I'd love to know what you think of it. And especially if you're a fan, I'd love to hear from you and know what your thoughts on this album are. And that's it from me for now.
Rated R, this is a warning. You better avoid, put it to paranoid. DJ's destroyed, cause I come back to attack. Religious spite, strike like lightning. It's quite frightening, but don't be afraid. In the dark, in a park, nor a scream or a cry, nor a sparkle like a spark. Temper like an alcoholic, muscles lighten up. What's that lighten up? You see a cipher, suddenly you feel like you're in horror.